Unless you're on console, aerial heroes have never been that popular, up until now.
Tattoos on leather tan skin, Jesus Christ on a plastic sign.
China's barrage takes out one, Willies will fall, Sakura, but full of hold.
Pharah and especially Echo have pretty poor pick rates amongst the general player base, but recently we've seen players like Zest dominate on Pharah, with Echo seeing a spot or two as well. But why? Let's find out. First, we'll look at the recent promotion relegation games in EMEA, most notably Vision Esports vs Frosttail, where we see the Pharah match up into the Tracer Sojourn. Pharah is someone I've always described as having the spam of Junkrat, the mobility of Echo, and the dueling potential of Tracer, and immediately we start seeing her spam the initial doorway to prevent the enemy backline from peeking, before helping to blow up Simple, who gets a bit too eager. A very unique aspect of Pharah as a spam hero is that she can basically off-angle anywhere she wants to. This unique attribute becomes very important on maps like Circuit Royale, which are so narrow with such few flanks that having the ability to off-angle in the air is pretty much unmatched. And here on Ilios, we see Pac flank through the left side, off-angle above the rooftops to avoid the sleep darts, before perching on the back right high ground. This is something that no other hero can really do, and if they can do it, they don't have the spam that Pharah does. It's one of the big downsides to playing Tracer on this specific map, because there's so much high ground that Tracer can barely use. More on this later. Pay attention to the shifts in playstyle too. We see Pac go from poking or spamming at distance to full on joining as Winston during the dive. While it is a bit crude, you can think of it like having a scale between spamming and diving, and you can slide anywhere on that scale. The key is to know when and how. Part of that comes to using weird quirky angles like we just saw above the roof, but also paying attention to what the rest of your team is doing. That idea becomes even more important when you've got Barrage. Here, Frosttail are stuffing Vision early to prevent them from touching points. Because the Winston Lucio is going in first, nobody is thinking or caring about Pac dive bombing from above. So it's not surprising to see Pac get a clean Barrage and finish the round easily. Barrage is a very boom or bust ultimate, and here's Zest showing the former. Credit to Capitology for highlighting this. All the work Zest does for the Barrage is actually done 10 seconds beforehand. Firstly, Zest spots Lethal playing very split from his backline, which gives enough of a trigger for Zest to barrage. Obviously, if the Cassidy was on his backline, Zest probably dies. So why is he not on his backline? Well, that's because Zest and his team are heavily marking the enemy frontline. Zera is having a tough time moving past Donghack, and Koffa is getting beamed anytime he peeks. This forces Lethal to walk up and take a more aggressive angle, so his Winston and Tracer have a bit more space to work with, but obviously that comes at a cost. Now, while Zest makes it look easy, you can see teams like Shikigami mess up their Nano Barrage. The timing is pretty off because Danny is ahead of his Orisa, and it's clearly rushed because he hasn't even got the moving barrage perk. All Shiki need to do is hard pressure the front line to back up, then Danny can Nano Barrage above the buildings with ease. After the failed barrage, Danny actually goes Echo and starts to win fights, but more on that later. If you're enjoying the video by the way and want help climbing, check out my Spyro approved coaching on my Metafy page. Now clearly, this doesn't tell the full story because even Zest himself swaps off the Pharah on King's Row 3rd. Even back on Ilios, Pac doesn't play Pharah most of the time on the other two maps, which funnily enough, they lose. There's two main reasons limiting Pharah's pick rates, the first and most obvious being map geometry. I've already mentioned how good Ilios Lighthouse is for Pharah because there's a great angle that Pharah can use on pretty much any section of the map. The same is true for King's Row 1st, where you can see Zest poke out the enemy hazard without needing to peek a hit scan. On Oasis Gardens, Zest literally flies directly above the enemy backline without getting punished because the map's got enough cover for the Pharah to use. The buildings are actually so high that it allows Zest to easily avoid Ana's sleep darts. It's basically impossible for Ultraviolet to land the sleep darts looking at his POV. I also call this aggressive but safe positioning, basically meaning to play in positions that, if the enemy team want to clear you from, they'd be putting themselves in danger. For instance, if Lethal wants to punish Zest, he has to walk all the way out in open space where, as you can see, he'll get punished by the Sojourn. However, when the map geometry becomes tighter and closer, then it's easier to punish the Pharah. On King's Row 3rd, we see that as soon as the Juno pops the torpedoes, Zest D peaks from the high ground. This allows Zero to safely wall climb and close that distance, and at this range, Genji is very threatening against the Pharah. Zest, knowing this, immediately dashes and flies away, eventually swapping to Genji. The second factor to call swaps is composition, more specifically, verticality. Now yes, hit scans do counter Pharah. We have seen teams literally swap to Juno Baptiste because Baptiste can deal with the Pharah a lot of the time. The less obvious point is how Pharah is pretty good into heroes that lack verticality. Back on Oasis, Zest is literally playing into a comp where only one hero can actually reach him. Cass and Tracer both lack verticality, and while it's obvious when I point it out, nobody can actually clear Zest from holding that small high ground window. In fact, Genji becomes more of an issue than Cassidy depending on how close he can get. But where does Echo come into the picture? Not gonna lie, this part of the video was annoying the script because nobody in the West plays Echo, but thankfully Danny did after the pretty mediocre barrage. Here, we see a textbook 3-2 setup with the Kiri Echo flanking to the left and everyone else down main. Because Danny had already used flight, and also because of how lethal Tracer can be, Danny swings the corner with distance, eventually doming the Tracer. Keep in mind, the Cass is also walking down main at the same time, putting the enemy team between a rock and a hard place. Next fight, we see one of Echo's most unique strengths, which is her ability to reach for kills, combined with her ultimate being used as a second life. Initially, when Danny leaves the high ground, Razor takes it, trying to get a better angle. However, Arise lands some key shots, and because of Echo's flight and beam, Danny's able to catch the kill. More importantly, because Danny commits positionally, the duplicate is used as a second life. Obviously, Ramattra would be a better duplicate target, but the key idea is that if somebody steps out of line or makes a mistake, you can punish that on Echo. Now I want to get into the nitty gritty micro between Echo and Genji, with this Facer Expert match being a good case study. To be clear, the Echo we'll be looking at, Warg, is one of, if not, the highest Echo player on ladder right now. The most important part between the matchup here, while obvious, is the fact that Genji cannot deal or counter your focusing beam at all. So all you need to do is get that Genji to half HP. Warg's way of doing that is to dive bomb from above, and yes, he does miss all his stickies and tri-shots. However, when the Genji dashes into him, he lands a very nice tri-shot which leads to the kill. Now I could chalk this up as a chipset unlucky moment and move on like most players would, but let's go a bit deeper. The key question here for the Genji is how can I outplay being headshots? That answer comes in your dash, where there's two issues. The first is that dash itself. Why not just shoot the Echo, walk a bit closer and force her flight? We saw something similar with Zero earlier, where just by Genji's close-up aura, it scares the Pharah to hold that position.
It scares me.
Another potential issue is where that dash finishes. Dashing to the side or behind the Echo instead of in front makes hitting that tri-shot much harder. Committing that dash is probably the main issue in the first place. Some of you might think I'm nitpicking or overanalyzing, but ask yourself, why are the Koreans way better than everyone else? How did Korea's 5th best team 3-0 and a supposedly best team? It's because they don't brush shit off as unlucky, and any top coach will tell you that too. Back to the Genji Echo stuff, Danny-fan tries to dash onto the Lucio, but again, Warg dive bombs from above. If those stickies didn't miss, the Genji would have been cooked. The main takeaway here is that your micro changes when playing Genji against Echo. Usually you'll dash in first and deflect out, but it's kinda swapped around when you're playing against Echo. Obviously, this isn't me saying to deflect in, but rather to keep your dash as your escape card over your deflects. We did actually see this in the last NA promotion relegation match. Razor would always have dash to escape Echo Beam if needed, not on one occasion, but on multiple. I will say though, I do want to highlight Danny's duplicate into an Ajax, which still didn't win them the map. Anyways, check out this video here if you enjoyed this one, and check out my Metafy page in the links below for coaching. Until next time.